Just because you don't have, an hour or 2 hours to sit down and work on your music doesn't mean you can't be productive. You just have to have a tool where you can sort of record your ideas. Even if it's on your iPhone, just do voice memos, just get the idea down. I'll be walking my dogs, right? And da, da, na, na, na. Okay, that was that idea, right?
I'm Sandy Smallins, and this is Four Strings and the Truth, where we shine a light on bass players who've had an outsized influence on the music that came after them. The low-enders we're speaking with carved out a new vocabulary for rock bass. They freed the instrument from the tyranny of sticking to the root notes. The bass became primary to the songs, foundational. The tunes simply couldn't exist without them. Today, I'm very pleased to be speaking with undersung heroine Kira Roessler. Kira's a lifelong bassist, singer, and songwriter. Her stint in legendary LA hardcore band Black Flag from 1983 to 1985 constituted a high watermark for the group. The only female on stage during their frequently tumultuous and violent shows, Kira toured relentlessly with Black Flag and played on a bunch of their best albums. In the wake of the tragic death of Dee Boone of the Minutemen, she and her then-husband, Minutemen bass wizard Mike Watt, formalized their bass-only duo, the aptly named Dose, featuring mind-bending instrumental compositions and some occasional vocals. And in 2021, she released her first solo record, which is called Kira, an amazing disc 13 years in the making. I highly recommend you pick it up, and we'll have links to it in our show notes. These days, Kira is an award-winning dialogue editor in Hollywood. She was part of the Oscar-winning team for Mad Max Fury Road and received Emmys for her work on HBO's John Adams and Game of Thrones miniseries. Not a bad pivot for punk rock royalty. Kira's in rare form today. You'll hear her describing how her style evolved from the heaviness of Black Flag to the homespun origins of the intertwining bass lines that we hear both in Dose and in her new solo record. We also discuss why bands are never democracies, the importance of warming up before any live gig, how to make every half hour count, her qualms with Steve Albini's studio approach, and how she and Mike Watt managed to keep making music together even if they still can drive each other crazy. I've had the pleasure of meeting Kira a few times, beginning with a chance encounter in late 1986 or early 1987, neither of us can really remember, when her former Black Flag bandmate Henry Rollins did a spoken word performance at Yale. Until we spoke today, I had no idea that night back in the 80s had such a harrowing ending for Kira. I'll let her explain.
So there I was in that neighborhood and had to walk to my neighborhood. And I didn't know that there were certain areas you just did not walk in, right? So I'm walking down the street, just heading home after seeing Henry. And suddenly bottles start crashing around my head, literally smashing. And I look back and these guys are running at me, throwing bottles. And get this, all of a sudden a car whips around the corner.
What?
Throws the door open and says, get in.
Somebody saved you? You were just saved?
From the gig, they saw me literally leaving the gig going, what is she doing walking down that street?
Oh my God.
Threw open their door. They said, what were you doing walking that street? I said, I don't know. I was walking back for the gig. They said, like, we saw you and we thought we better get it. And they saved my life.
Oh my God.
And those people would have killed me from 50 feet away with bottles.
Then the second time we met was when you and Mike played, I believe it was one of the first Dose live gigs, and I believe it was in New London. Does that make sense to you?
Wow. I don't remember a solo gig. The only time we did out-of-town gigs was usually opening up for Firehose.
So maybe it was that.
I'd move back to LA and would fly out to join up with their tour for a few dates and then fly back to work. Is this microphone working well enough there, or should I get it closer to?
I mean, if you want to move it a little closer, I'll take more as well.
Okay, because
I mean, of all the people to adjust sound stuff with, I feel like I'm in good shape right here.
Well,
You're
exactly.
a dialogue editor. I work with dialogue editors every day. Yes.
I was just working 5 minutes ago before I joined because I got to get ready for a Monday morning ADR session. Yeah.
What an unbelievable, I'd say second act. I don't know how many acts you've had or you think you've had, but award-winning new acts. You're really now coasting up all these awards. You're working on these major, major budgeted films. It must be really gratifying.
I consider myself extremely lucky. Things just kept falling into place for me.
Well, again, I don't want to take too much time, especially since you were gracious enough to speak with me on a Saturday. I really wanted to make a show to celebrate folks like you, folks who, I hope it's not too awkward to say right to your face, but people who I feel like their contribution to the way that they played bass has influenced countless people after them. And you continue to do that. You made your first solo record in 2021. So it was 40 plus years after you picked up the bass. Just incredible and very, very inspiring. People think of, oh, yes, Kira was key part of like the best lineup of Black Flag. And I go, dude, have you listened to those? They've put out several records.
And I was in bands before Black Flag, actually. I didn't join Black Flag having just started playing bass. I played from 14 to 22 before that.
Right.
Bass became a thing for me.
It became your thing.
Before that.
Is that on your end?
That is my landline. Just to
You have
say,
a landline.
I have a landline. And I can tell you who it is. Every Saturday at 2 p.m., my father calls me, rain or shine.
God bless. I'm sorry I'm interrupting that.
No, don't worry. We'll talk another time.
Tell me a little bit about your upbringing and where you did most of your growing up as a young child.
So I was born in New Haven and Connecticut, and I lived there till I was 8 years old. And my father worked not only for Yale University, but for IBM there in computers. And then when I was 8, he wanted to get out of the rat race. So he got interested in underwater photography and moved the family to an island called Curacao, which is off the coast of Venezuela. It's a Dutch-owned territory, or was at the time. Dutch schools, Dutch government, which is where I went to school. We lived there for 3 years. We scuba dived every day, and he took pictures and blah, blah, blah. And then moved to Moraga, California, outside of San Francisco. He started a travel business to run scuba diving tours all over the world to continue his magical life. And then my parents divorced. My mom and my brother and I moved to Los Angeles, which I was certain was just gangs and violence because I just had no idea where I was going. We moved to West LA, which is not full of gangs and violence. And then my mom moved away. I started playing bass at 14 while she was still there. My brother was in this progressive rock band and their bass player left. And I had quit piano, which I played from 6 till 11. In Curacao, I quit because I felt so frustrated I couldn't keep up with my 3-year-older brother. And I suddenly dawned on me that if I had played a different instrument, we could play together instead of competing, which was all in my mind, I'm sure. So I started practicing really hard, like a lot of hours a day. I would do scales and I would work on his prog rock piece. And I borrowed this Rickenbacker bass from a guy and I just practiced all the time and was never even close to good enough to joining his prog rock band. But luckily, Paul got into punk rock. Well, my mom moved away, and so we moved into this basically like a crash pad in the valley. And I, again, was still going to school, so I'm going to Van Nuys High at the time, playing in bands, and started the first punk rock band. And in terms of the bass playing, I got to learn from this amazing guitar player named Glenn Brown, who was a total rock and roll guy. He was the one who sort of disengaged me from this stylistic thing where I was accuracy and complexity and got me totally separated from that, not because of punk rock, but because of things like groove and spaces and how does music even work and where does bass sit in a rock band. And luckily he had all that in his head. And there we were doing punk rock songs, but we also jammed for hours and hours in this garage doing whatever styles we felt. Different people would jump in for jams and all styles of music were happening in that garage. I was Candy Kane in my first punk rock band, Wax. We played the Whiskey the first time I ever played at 16 years years old.
What year was this?
16 would be 77. And it was a Rodney on the Rocks Sunday afternoon show opening for Crime and the Dills.
Oh, my God.
Amazing, right? Lucky me. I hadn't even chopped my hair off. I still have really long hair. The boys chopped their hair off that day, and we threw it into the audience because we thought, how punk rock was that? And I had a big chain around my neck. I sang 2 songs and just screamed them.
Playing the Rickenbacker, the one that you...
I bought that Rickenbacker from the guy.
The blue one, right? Was it
No,
blue?
no, at that time it was a blonde one that I played from 14 till it was stolen when I was in Twisted Roots. That was when I bought a blue one because Charlotte from the Eyes, way pre-Go-Go's, was a bass player in the Eyes. She was
Charlotte
amazing.
Caffrey.
Yes, great bass player.
Incredible musician.
Mediocre guitar player, if you ask me.
Songwriter, though, good songwriter.
But great bass player in the Eyes, and had this beautiful bass that I always envied. So I borrowed money from my dad after my blonde one got stolen.
And that's a 4003 or 4001, not to get too nerdy.
4001, the blonde one was. The blue one might have been a 4003.
Because the neck needed to withstand the onslaught.
And I'm not strong enough to give anything any onslaught, let's face it. The thing for me about the Rickenbacker was that the neck is a little thinner than a Fender, and with a small hand, you got more length on your finger. If you can stretch out over a smaller neck, I would pick up a Fender. It always felt like a really fat neck. But it was a full-scale bass. If I pick one up now, I feel like I'm going to break because I have my 3/4 copy, my old lady bass, as I call it, which is a 3/4 scale copy of a Rickenbacker with a Telecaster headstock, because Mike Watt said, yeah, it's dumb to have tuning pegs on the top and bottom. So he designed it after the Rickenbacker, except he thought the headstocks were dumb, so he put a Telecaster headstock on it.
Right, that's a custom bass that you're playing now. It's also blue. I saw some of your publicity shots from the record release, and your hair was blue, your bass was blue, and you're bathed in a blue light. And I was like, goddess in blue, love this.
It's a very blue thing. Yes.
By the way, I can tell you on 2 hands the number of people that now, male, female, strong, weak, that play 3/4.
Mike does.
Mike does. Mike's signature bass is a short scale.
Well, here's the thing. When I was coming up on bass, if you will, short scale basses sounded like crap.
Yes.
I bought a Mustang. It was a terrible mistake. It sounded terrible. It made me want to cry after having my Rickenbacker, which honestly didn't sound that great. My blue Rickenbacker, Mike and I customized it, swapped out the bridge, the nut, the pickups, everything was swapped out on it. And when I got a subsequent Rickenbacker, I moved all that hardware over, And on the short scales now, though, they are amazing. And my blue bass is the best sounding bass I ever heard. But it was stolen for 10 days. Well, that's a fun story. And so I have a blonde one now, too, because the guy made me a blonde one. And it doesn't sound the
original.
same.
The luthier made you a copy of this
guy,
one that
Mark Garza, the brand name Garza, he makes basses. He'll make you a Kira bass. He'll make anyone. I mean, he has that on his website. Like, if that's what you want, he would do it because he has the mold. Mike called him after my bass was stolen and got him started on making me another bass. And then I got it back and it was already in process. So, of course, we didn't tell the guy, never mind. He was making me a bass. So now I have a blonde one, but it doesn't sound the same at all as the blue one, made by the same guy, from the same wood, from everything. And it sounds different. It's just, every guitar sounds different. It doesn't matter. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's so funny. It sounds so gorgeous. The blue one is the one you played on the solo record, correct?
Yes, I've been playing it almost exclusively, yes. So the solo record became a set of those songs that made sense together that was really across 15 years. But I think most of the songs were recorded with the blue bass, yeah.
But it's somewhat chronological in terms of the sequence of the record?
Well, it's a bit of a story, and there's a set of the songs within there that the first song is from about 13 years before the release date, and the last song was written, the year of the release. It's a love story.
It's a love story and a tale of loss, right?
Yes. Yes, yeah, it's about my dog.
Right. Whose face adorns the cover.
Yes, on the front, on the back, he's gone. Yeah, but hey, this is the thing about love. There's absolutely no regret in having loved and lost, because the alternative is not having loved at all. I just recently lost another little man, so I'm going through it all over again, and I wouldn't trade it for the world, even though it hurts so bad. Look, you pay tribute in whatever way you pay tribute. I write songs. Hank now, my one I just lost, has 2 songs in the works. One was already in the works when he was still alive. So, I tell my stories of my life. Maybe no one will ever hear these songs, but maybe they will. Maybe there'll be another one.
Hey, Mama. Come on. I don't know. Come on.
Earlier on in Black Flag, Greg was really setting the stage and almost assigning parts and roles. Is that a fair assessment?
Look, I always say this. Bands are not democracies. Come on. The songwriter is generally calling the shots, as well they should. Mike and I, where it was kind of a democracy, a band of 2 people, the songwriter still basically was the one who was dictating the moment, if you will, and the stronger personality might have had something to do with it at times. Of course, it was Greg's band. They were my favorite band when I joined, long before I joined, and I had a total respect for that. I was there to play a role, as bass players often do. You got to have your own band. That's why we started Dusk. You got to have your own band to be calling the shots if you're a bass player.
Well, no, it's absolutely true. Black Flag really stretched out what they were doing while you were in the band. The records that you guys made, In My Head and Loose Knot, they became more improvisational and such. I would imagine at that point, would it be more of a thing where you could actually insert more of your creativity and freestyle approach? Or no, not really?
Well, look, it's funny because my first, if you will, tryout practice with Greg and Bill worked the same way that the instrumentals always worked, which is Greg had a riff and you'd play the riff. And my job was to play the riff over and over and over and over so that he and Bill could do whatever they want. And my job was to hold down the fort, hold down the riff, and I was good at it, which is why they hired me. Literally, we did it for a couple hours. I held down the riff, and they were like, okay, this is cool. And that's what they were looking for, the ability for them to be freestyle, but not in a way that wasn't structured. There would be this structure, and I was, in a sense, providing that structure to come back to within those instrumental songs. Now, we did do a lot of freeform jamming in the room, and we tried to record freeform jams, which never really, to my mind, hit the mark the way they would in practice. But live, it was generally these instrumentals. We didn't do a lot of freeform jamming on the stage.
Oh, so it's still very structured, even live.
Yes.
I didn't realize Bill also had this license from Greg to do as much freestyle stuff.
Well, because again, that I was holding things down, he could start doing these off the beat things and off the riff things and come back to them, and try things rhythmically, because he'd know that riff was still, that rhythm, that riff was still being defined. So he would do, fills and break out himself, knowing that he could go and come back, and then he'd come back, right?
So you're truly the glue for them.
Bass player's job.
That is our job.
Unless you're in Dose or AwkWard. Have you heard AwkWard?
I have not heard AwkWard. Who's AwkWard?
I have another 2-bass band.
What?
Yes.
When is this?
Well, let's call it a project. Devin Hoff is a stand-up bass player, and he and I recorded, basically have an EP out, and we recorded it at my brother's studio, Kitten Robot.
Right.
We sort of had the virtual band thing, which is also what I've been doing with Glenn Brown, from the original Glenn Brown that I worked with.
Glenn Brown who taught you how to play bass.
He and I have done virtually sending songs back and forth. He lives in Cleveland. All of the record really was done this way, where the songs were built across the internet, and then mixed at Paul's studio. But AwkWard still has a set of newer material that we're working on. And it's just amazing what a stand-up bass with a bow sometimes. I mean, he's an incredible player. One of the first times I saw him, he did The Process of the Weeding Out, the Black Flag record, on bass, playing a myriad of the medley of those songs and interpreting that record. He's
with the bass, but playing bass and guitar parts and...
Yeah. Just an incredible, talented musician. He's toured with other acts too. But anyways, two-bass band is kind of my thing. And my music now often has two intertwining bass lines just because that's my way.
I noticed that on the solo record too.
Yeah.
But also you and Mike and you are innovators in this remote recording back and forth. Back in the day, I believe you guys were sending 4 tracks back and forth to each other.
Well, when I lived in New Haven, when you and I first met, Dose was working on its first record, and we were sending 4-track cassettes back and forth over the regular mail, right? Because that's how you had to do it. And we were building our record, basically. You have to have some sort of tool to which to listen back to yourself, to edit yourself, to refine. And I have had something like that for 40 years now. But this way of collaborating, look, I do a lot of my work at 6:30 in the morning. No one wants to play with me, even people here in town. My creative work happens before my dialogue editing work starts at 9 a.m., right? So I got to be 6:30 a.m. working on bass lines and stuff or singing, and then I got to go to work. I can't do anything after work. Are you kidding? I'm fried, right? So the only way I could get any creative work done is before work or on the weekends. So the virtual thing makes a certain amount of sense. I think it's a great way to enhance the possibilities.
And then when you were doing the original Dose stuff and saying the 4 tracks back and forth, would you capture like a click track as well, or would you just send it with a naked bass line and Mike would just match it and vice versa?
No, without a click track. See, the thing about Dose is it's all about the spaces. What we learned is that you have to leave holes for each other because you can't just play on top of each other. It's just too fat for that. We didn't ever want to do this where you were playing the low stuff and I'm playing the high stuff. That wasn't how it was designed, right? So it was about leaving spaces. And when you have spaces without a click track, it gets pretty esoteric, especially if you're like me and you play off the beat a lot and you exclude the one a lot of the time. I've had songs where I did a click track in Pro Tools, recorded the 2 bass lines, took that Pro Tools session, sent it to my friend, the drummer, Dave Bach, who played on the record and plays on these songs, and had him go, oh, something's wrong here. I have to shift everything because she's not started. The one must be here. And come back to me with these drum parts. And I'm like, what the hell is this drum part, right? And I go back to him and it's like, dude, this song is in 4/4. And he's like, no, it's in 3/4 on this part. And I'm like, no, I happen to know. I wrote it. It goes like this. So without something, it could be really hard when you don't play very straight bass lines. And now as time has evolved, my bass lines have gotten more and more non-traditional, if you will.
You tend to play on the back of the beat.
Basically, in trying to define this really complex thing, which is why the hell would Greg fire Chuck Dukowski, who's the most amazing bass player in the world, right?
And a great songwriter, too.
Right. So how do you explain this and say it's because of his playing? In looking at that and working with Greg, I've developed this sort of theory, which goes sort of like Dukowski was someone who had this sort of galloping style, and it was almost like ahead of the beat and pushing things forward and forward and forward, right? You can even see in how he moves his body, lifts his knee. It's like a galloping horse, right? What I could really tell with Greg is this thing about sort of sitting back and that he was really concerned about the heaviness, that the heaviness of the music would be lost unless we really held it back and each beat was, existed in this very sort of heavy way and wasn't lost in the momentum, and that somehow that he felt was being lost. And that has really very little to do with how I play outside of Black Flag. That was purely a Black Flag thing.
Oh, okay.
When I work with Dose, I learn things about the spaces and the holes. And so Mike would have this song, right? And he would be playing on the one. And one of the things I suddenly realized that was most effective was we'll leave the one out of my part. So his comes around and mine responds to it. And so now I'll play on some guy's rock record and my bass line will not be playing on the one. And it's like totally non-traditional and people have a little bit of a reaction. I've actually done some bass lines for my brother, like from some band I've never even met. And he said, well, you record some bass lines to these songs, and he sends me a song. And I'll record sort of the Kira kind of bass line, and then I'll record a more traditional bass line in case it's just too wacky. And I'm like, okay, here's some ideas. You guys decide. Because I learned the effectiveness, because everyone's often jumping on the one. Like, it's like, why is everybody playing on the one? Now, having played in DOS, I've got this real aversion to all of us jumping on the same thing when there's all this other space. I've learned to find the spaces.
It's so interesting. And it's also a function of whom you're playing drums with. I guess in your case, you're composing and it's
pre-drums.
Right, exactly. So they'll adjust to you. When I saw Dose live back in the 80s, it was definitely one of the first couple of Dose shows. It was funny to me because a couple of these lines that I'd thought, oh, that must be Mike, because it sounded like a Minutemen thing. It was you. And then there was like stuff that Mike was doing. I was like, oh, that's so Kira. Now when I listen, I can tell the difference because I know the basses. I think Mike was still using his telly with the PJ setup, and I think you were still using your Rick. So you can tell tone-wise, the PJ pickups have a different sort of mid-rangey honkiness.
My Rickenbacker doesn't sound like a standard Rickenbacker.
It doesn't. And your new custom bass maybe sounds more like a Rickenbacker.
I think no. I don't think so, because the thing about Rickenbacker that I didn't like and that Mike and I didn't like is that it has all this low and then this clacky high, and it really kind of lacks the growling mid-range that you find in the Fender, right? So we were really trying to Fenderize it slightly and get rid of the clacking, because I tend to hit the strings too hard. Mike always hated that, and he'd put me through a compressor because I'm going to go off and hit the strings too hard. Mike is saying this. You get that, right? You get the irony of that, right?
Yes, that is ironic.
Yeah, but I would say the interesting thing about the DOS part writing is 99% of the time, if it's my song, I'm writing both bass lines and Mike is playing my bass line. If it's his song, he's writing only the one bass line and I'm writing the second part. And he's then giving me feedback. But I have whole parts that I wrote to one of his songs that he threw out that have become my own songs because I thought that was a cool bass line and he threw it out. So my point is, stylistically, I can imagine you might think sometimes he's playing one of the bass lines, and you'd be right, because the bass line was written by me at times. Sometimes he is playing my parts. I'm rarely playing his parts because, honestly, I can't really play his parts. On Mike's hands, there's a big difference physically, right, in terms of what Mike's capable of doing. I have my own skill set, if you will. I would argue I'm a little better timekeeper than Mike, but he definitely physically has the capability of doing things that I can barely pull off, especially since there is that aspect of interpretation too. And so I would just find one of his bass lines just so cumbersome to do, but I have at times. The other thing about DOS that's interesting is people think there's a lot of jamming. For me, there's never anything that is not written ahead. Now, occasionally, Mike will have a jam built into his part, a free-form part, but most everything is pre-written, which is why there were 4 records in 30 years.
And then you've primarily been a fingerstyle player. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Forever and a day.
Was there ever a moment where you said, there's some things maybe a little more attack, let me pick up a pick?
Nope. For me, it's a physical thing. I pick up a pick and I feel like the muscle between my thumb and my forefinger is going to explode. It's like I can't hold it. The thing is, I actually think our hands evolve into these things that are no longer hands. After a while, I have some damage in my right hand from playing the bass guitar. Well, I'm left-handed. What idiot
Right, you
decides,
taught yourself
right?
right-handed, correct?
Because I thought the left hand was the hard part until I joined a band with a drummer. And then I found out the right hand's the hard part. So my point is that my hand sort of evolved it. There's no way I could switch. I think that when you do something physical with your hands for years and years and years, they actually evolve. And Mike's hands have evolved. And I just evolved to a point where I pick up a pick and it's the most foreign feeling thing in the world. And Mike, I think, only picked up the pick because Iggy Pop made him.
Well, no, the first couple of Minutemen stuff, he was using a pick a little bit, right? But like the Mike Watts playing that I fell in love with from the mid-period Minutemen records, all fingers.
He has a recorded Stooges record, which a lot of people say is not a great. I actually was on a podcast once describing being on the pro side of that record when they were arguing against the Weirdness record. Albini's style of production is not to produce, but let the band do whatever they want,
engineer,
right? Yeah. But we won't say that to everybody. No, I'm just kidding. I'll say
No, Steve Albini would be the first person to say that, I think.
Yeah, I know, because I've had to relay down bass lines for a band who he recorded this anyway. He'll let them shoot themselves in the foot, I would argue, which you'd think if he's going to sell himself as a producer, he would actually try to help a band who was green and needed a little help. But no, let the band do what they do. Anyways, I like to throw stones.
Can I leave that in? Can I leave that in?
Yeah, I'll throw stones.
I'd like to start a feud with you and Steve Albini because I'd actually put my money on you.
I would talk to Steve Albini about this because I was at his place replacing the bass line for one of these records. So I would talk to him about it.
You went to Electrical Sound?
I went there and recorded a bass on a record that was recorded at his studio with a different bass player with a bass sound that was really poor. And he could have helped. It was just not a good sounding bass recording. He could have helped. But anyways, I would have that argument. I'm sure I said it to him at the time.
Right.
Why did you let the guy do that?
I didn't realize you're doing studio work for other people as well.
Yeah, I've offered myself up. I have had Facebook people contact me, say, will you do a bass thing? If I send you the song, will you write a... And I've done that, just blind, not knowing anything. I've done that.
Do you charge a flat fee when you do that?
No. No, just like I've never charged for bass lessons either. I figure this is my way of giving back to the world that's given me so much. Is if someone asks for an interview, I always say yes. If someone asks me to play, this is an honor to be asked to contribute to someone's. Look, people's records or songs are their heart, they're their blood and sweat, right? It's so personal, and they're asking me to participate. And in terms of lessons, I'm not a teacher, so I don't consider myself as having this great skill set to use to give them. You know, I'm like this dorky bass player trying to tell another dorky bass player how to play. I'll do what I can.
Let me ask you a question in terms of getting on stage and playing bass. Which was more frightening for you, the first time you stepped on stage with Black Flag or the first time you stepped on stage to play a Dose gig?
Let's see. Okay, my first Black Flag gig was a party, so I probably wasn't too nervous right before, but by about halfway into the first song, when my right hand completely cramped up and I felt like it was a mallet that I was raking across I got very scared, which, guess what, did not help with the fact that my hand was completely cramped up. That was the first and last time with Black Flag I ever didn't warm up. And to this day, I warm up before every gig. Even if it's going to be a 2-hour show with Black Flag, I warm up beforehand because you do not want to start the first song without having your hand warm. So that party was very scary when that happened because it had never happened to me before. The first Dose gig, I'm sure I was terrified because I had never been a front person ever till Dose. But we only had one singing song very early. It was all instrumental, and obviously I had a lot more confidence as a bass player than as a singer. One of the most tricky things about Dose is that I became more of a singer. It wasn't that I felt like I don't know how to sing, but it was like singing and playing and being the front person from a band. That was terrifying from Dose. And Dose is so quiet. You can literally hear people talking about you sing while you sing. How does that sound? Does that sound like fun?
Not
Do
at
you
all.
want to hear a critique of your voice while you sing? Mike gets super scared during Dose gigs.
Does
As
it?
as a matter of fact, the most fun I ever had with Mike on stage was his birthday in Long Beach. We played this pizza place in Long Beach, and he was drunk out of his mind. And it was the most fun because he finally, sure, there were clams, but it was just energy and fun. And he wasn't caught up, and he was leaning over me while I was singing and singing back up instead of what he often did at other gigs, which is tell me, you're speeding up, you're slowing down while we're playing. You know,
Out
or
loud?
stuff
He'd say it loud?
right, criticizing, kind of like we talked about the audience doing, but Mike's doing it. And his nerves, we would have these debriefs post gig too. I mean, there's just so much nerves, and he would go, "You were so great. I was so scared." Like we would have these discussions, right? Because the truth is, Dose is terrifying. There's nothing to hide behind.
There's no net. There's no safety net.
It's
in Dose.
naked. Your voice is octaves above the bass, so you've got no support. I mean, it's just terrifying. So definitely beforehand, I would say any Dose gig was more terrifying. But the cramp in my hand at the party, I was scared straight into learning to warm up before gigs.
Okay. How long are these warm-ups? And they just consist of running up and down a neck? What are they like?
When it was in Black Flag, a lot of it would have to do with the right hand. So it would be potentially just banging on that E string, because I had to do that a lot. I literally dug a hole with just my middle finger in the paint in my Rickenbacker from just playing the E string just with my middle finger, right? It's just where that would hit, because my index finger would hit the pick guard. My left hand was never demanded that much of during Black Flag. Now in a Dose gig, different matter. Mike forced me to play up and down the neck a lot more than I ever do with my solo performances.
So when you're writing for your solo stuff now, does everything still begin from the bass, or does it start with a melody and you pick up a bass to sort of work out the melody in your head?
So it could start from a phrase, some words. It could start from a musical phrase. Musically, I'm a bass player. I only write on the bass. So that's how I put the music in. But there are times when words exist first, or feelings or ideas exist first. And there are times when bass lines exist first. But oddly, the farther I get into this songwriting, and I'm a very late bloomer in terms of being more prolific, I'm more prolific today than ever. I actually think part of it is because I'm working on this musical movie, and in defense from having those songs go through my head all the time, I have to be working on my own songs. I've just been writing a bunch of songs, even while I'm working.
So it's like a palate cleanser from your day job?
It's a defense mechanism, man. That's what I call it. Anyways, because something's going through your head all the time, right? It's either driving you crazy, or it's like, hey, I'm working on my new song. But nowadays, having Pro Tools as a tool allows me to, I've gotten very good at using half hours. And this is also the time management thing. Just record a part, or just sing this melody on this one thing, or work on this second bass line for one thing. Like I've learned to just have to, because of my schedule, make half hours count. And that's something I can advise everyone. It's just because you don't have an hour or 2 hours to sit down and work on your music doesn't mean you can't be productive. You just have to have a tool where you can sort of record your ideas. Even if it's on your iPhone, which I know people who do a lot with that, right? Just do voice memos. Just get the idea down. I'll be walking my dogs, right? And like, da, da, na, na, na. Okay, that was that idea, right? Or at work, my notes app has my lyrics now, so that if I come up with an idea while I'm at lunch or doing my lunchtime meditation, if you could believe it, I might come up with a phrase or a word. So anything goes with songwriting. There's just no rules.
And then Pro Tools is something, did you learn that to do your day gig as dialogue editor, or did you learn it, or was it just coincidental? You already knew it because you were trying to move your composition there?
I think I was introduced to it by the guy who I first went to work, but very, very early, like Pro Tools 3. We went past to 2021.7 or whatever, right?
How involved do you get in the mixing, in the post-production of your material, like with your solo music, then the stuff you're doing with AwkWard and Dose?
I was super involved in AwkWard and Dose. The last record, Mike pretty much wanted me to take charge. It's funny, for a long time, it was more him. First 3 records probably. And then later he was willing, as I guess because I work in sound, I don't know.
Right.
He finally decided maybe I had something to bring to the table. I don't know.
Well, also, if there is singing, it's you generally.
Oh, that wouldn't have stopped him in the past. But
I see.
I think it's also just growing up. Being a control freak, and we both are, it's super difficult to let go of the reins, and he's, I'm sure, gotten better at it over the years, and so have I. And that being said, we're still total control freaks. So we come to harsh words often when we work together, Mike and I.
Really?
I think that the marriage aspect didn't help. There's just been one too many arguments. So everything is a wound, if you will. And I think if Mike and I tried to do something, we'd come to argument again, just like the very last time we recorded. Dosa's not officially broken up, but it has been a long time.
Right.
It was a total fight. My husband was sitting in the control room, and the person who was recording said, "Do they always fight like this?" And this was the last time he and I recorded. I think I might have said, I'll never do this again at the time.
I hope that's not true.
I don't know.
Unless it's going to drive you crazy.
I don't know if it's true or not. I'll just say that. Never say never.
This is a question I'm sure you've been asked a lot, but I need to ask it because if we're talking about your legacy from the very early days in Black Flag and being a woman on stage with Black Flag, did it feel especially significant? Did you feel like you were a torchbearer or like you were blazing new trails?
Well, I've never been a guy in Black Flag, so this is always a difficult...
Right.
Of course, I didn't think of myself as a torchbearer. No, nothing like that. I was already, from the day I was born, practically, I was a tomboy. I didn't identify with girls. And if I was born today, I could easily be a they. I've never really identified with girly girls, especially. And that was a challenge my whole life and still is. So I certainly never thought I was blazing a trail for females. I so badly wanted to be one of the boys. I played football in school.
Football, not soccer. Football.
No, football. I just wanted to be with the boys. I had more fun and identified with the boys and not the girls. And so the way I saw myself in Black Flag was trying to be one of the boys. Now, of course, always my whole life comes slamming up against the reality of not being one of the boys. I've been thrown out of bands because of relationship issues between boys and girls. And the fact that I was a girl has continuously created issues in my attempting to be one of the boys. So I knew by then that it wasn't that black and white. Waking up in the van with someone staring at you, it's just not cool. Come on. I wanted to be one of the boys, but I was weaker and female and perceived to be some sort of sexual object and somehow perceived as hard to get along with, which it's easier to understand in hindsight than it is when you're in it, right? I mean, now I understand some of my part in why I was difficult to get along with. But when I was going to be thrown out of Black Flag, which I knew was happening, it was devastating. That being said, in hindsight, I could see my part. It's always easier later. But no, not a torchbearer, and certainly unable to set an example for any girls except if they're total tomboys like me.
When I met you in New Haven, I was extremely intimidated by you because of who you were and what you do musically.
This is one of the things, though, I think that adds complexity to relationship, right? It's like, I think when a girl intimidates a guy, there is often this backlash to that. Not for you, but for a lot of, right? There's a jockeying for position, and if I provide any sort of intimidation or strength, that calls into question the male dominance of the relationship, right? And some of that not being conscious. This isn't me accusing all men of consciously being in a battle with me for power, but certainly subconsciously, we're all in battles for power all the time. So if I intimidate or seem capable or strong or have strong ideas, well, that just makes me harder to get along with because I'm not a guy.
But it's interesting, though, too, because two of the bands that you're known best for were with people that at one point or another you'd had, even brief, like with Henry, relationships with. The fact that you and Mike are still you guys were married for 7 years, I read. I didn't even realize it was that long. You were married when I met you guys. I didn't even realize it because you really didn't talk about him or that too much. It didn't come up. But it's amazing to me. And the fact that you describe even the last recording with him for Dose continued to be contentious, but yet you still come back to it. That in itself is inspiring and maybe a lesson people could take from how to conduct themselves after they've been in a relationship.
Honestly, hindsight is everything. What I couldn't do in the marriage was let Mike be Mike. And what I could do in Dose was let Mike be Mike, to make it so simple. And I had made a commitment. I thought of Dose as a context for our relationship post the divorce. And I think he did too. And we wanted it. We valued it. We thought it was special aside from our relationship. But we do push each other's buttons like crazy. And I'm not alone in this. I do know other players who have played with Mike who find him a little bit difficult to work with.
Yeah, he's a dude. He's like a special kind of dude. He's a definite
character. Yes. Bands are like marriages. Yeah. Marriages are like bands. Very few of them stay together. For you to be wanting the same things for a long time would be amazing. And it is amazing when it's achieved. And bands that achieve that, I have the utmost respect for the fact that they can hold together that very difficult relationship for a long time, because you are so interdependent in a band. How do you stay in the same place?
Do you have a favorite bass line you've ever played? Is there the one that you go, like if someone said, I want to hear one sample of you playing, like what would you send?
Well, one I was super proud of that goes way back, pre-Black Flag, was a song in Twisted Roots called Pretend You're What. It's on a record.
It's called what?
Pretend You're What. It's on a record. The record is called Pretend You're What. It was a single. And my bass line on that, still to this day, I'm so proud of, because it had an element of free-formness that I rarely go after. And my playing with my brother was also super challenging, and he often wanted a more traditional bass line. So it was one of these exact opposites of what I was normally doing in Twisted Roots. And I don't know, it was really demonstrative of this formative moment of me breaking out as a bass player way before I knew what the hell I was doing. I'm very proud of that. My solo record and my solo materials have some stuff that I feel like captures emotionally stuff more now. But
Such
just
good playing
pure
on it.
bass
I love
line.
the solo record, the playing on it. It just sounds so beautiful.
Thank you so much.
It's a dinner party record for me, weirdly. When I have people over, I like to play stuff. There's not too many instruments, and it's kind of like simple and interesting.
You bring up this idea of the dinner music. I originally started writing intertwining bass lines when I moved to New Haven because I was afraid my nephews would forget about me. So I would record the bedtime stories of my voice and do these intertwining bass lines because I thought they would be soothing as bedtime stories, the two basses on their own. It happened sort of organically, this two bass music, but now that it's here, what little bit I can say, it's my life's work, it's my life's work.
Oh, well. Kira, this has been fantastic. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you'd like to say to a potential audience of bass and good music fans?
To quote Mike Watt, start your own band. I don't know, express yourself, don't forget that music is about expression and try to do what's the expected thing or the obvious thing. You try to express yourself however that looks to you. Start a 2 kick drum band. Do something. Punk rock is about not following some idea. It's not about really fast songs and screaming lyrics. It's about doing what's not been done. So challenge yourself. Don't imitate.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
You've been listening to 4 Strings and the Truth. I want to thank Kira Roessler for delaying her weekly call with her dad to spend 90 minutes or so with me. You can find links to all of Kira's music in the show notes, and I highly recommend you go to Bandcamp and download her solo album, also called Kira, from the Kitten Robot label. Stay tuned for next time when we talk to another bass hero. And in the meantime, if you think about someone you want us to interview, please do not email us. Thanks.
Audiation.